Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too join the Prime Minister in congratulating Alistair Cook on a fantastic achievement and both teams on what has been an absolutely brilliant series, which I really enjoyed. Mr. Speaker, the National Farmers Union, the Federation of Small Businesses, the National Audit Office, the National Housing Federation, Gingerbread and the Royal Society of Arts. Does the Prime Minister know what these organisations have in common?
Minister.
Yes, I can tell the right honourable gentleman that what those organisations all have in common is that across a variety of areas of activity, they give excellent service, they promote the interests of those that they represent, and they are bodies with which this government interacts and to which this government listens.
Jeremy Corbyn.
I am truly grateful to the Prime Minister for that answer, the first part of which I wholly agree. But what they also have... It's all right. It's all right. But what they also have in common, Mr. Speaker, is that they're telling this government its flagship benefits policy, universal credit, is flawed and failing hundreds of thousands of people, both in work and out of work. In 2010, the government declared that universal credit would lift 350,000 children out of poverty. Does the Prime Minister stand by that figure?
Prime Minister.
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, we introduced universal credit because we needed a system of welfare in this country which encouraged people into work rather than discouraged them into work, which made sure that work always pays, and that was a simpler system than the legacy system that we were left by the Labour Party. Remember the legacy system of the Labour Party? It meant that we even had individuals being paid £100,000 a year on benefits, all paid for by hard-working taxpayers earning a fraction of that sum.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, the Child Poverty Action Group says that far from taking children out of poverty, universal credit will now increase the number of children in poverty. And since 2010, 500,000 more children have gone into poverty relative to that time. The government knows this policy is flawed and failing. Their own survey on universal credit found many were in debt, a third in arrears with their rent, half fallen behind with their bills. Does the Prime Minister dispute her own government survey or dispute the experience of the claimants?
Prime Minister.
The experience of some of the claimants. Roberta, who said, "My work coach helped turn my life around. He tailored his support to my situation, and thanks to him I found my dream job." Ryan, "I'm happy with the new universal credit. My work coach has been great. I didn't expect to have a job so soon." Naeem, universal credit gave me the flexibility to take on additional hours without the stress of thinking this might stop my benefits straight away. We have gone from a situation under the Labour Party where 1.4 million people spent most of a decade trapped on benefits. We are helping get people into work, and that's why earlier this week we saw unemployment yet again at a record low.
Mr. Speaker, we are all constituency MPs, and I think most of us are well aware of the pain that universal credit is causing when people come into our advice bureaus. 60% of families facing cuts due to the two-child policy are in work. Yes. Universal credit isn't making work pay, it's taking money away from families and putting more children into poverty. The National Audit Office report found that universal credit is creating hardship forcing people to use food banks and could actually end up costing the system even more. Yeah. Does the Prime Minister dispute the National Audit Office findings?
Prime Minister!
The right honourable gentleman talked about constituency cases. I remember.
Order! We're at a very early stage of the proceedings. We've got a long way to go. The questions must be heard and the answers must be heard. And as usual, I want to get through the order paper. The Prime Minister.
The right honourable gentleman started his question by talking about constituency cases. I remember the single mother who came to see me as her Member of Parliament when Labour were in government, who told me that she wanted to get into the workplace and provide a good example to her child. But the job centre had told her she'd be better off on benefits. That's the legacy of the Labour Party.
Mr. Speaker, my question was about the National Audit Office. The Trussell Trust backs the NAO. They say that food bank usage in areas where universal credit has been rolled out is 4 times higher than in areas where it has not been introduced. But without resolving any of those failings in the next year, the government proposes to inflict this on another 2 million people. Yeah. As part of that transfer, hundreds of thousands of people with disabilities on ESA, JSA and tax credits will receive a letter telling them their support will be stopped. They will have to make an application for universal credit. Does the Prime Minister think it's the responsibility of the government which is changing the system to ensure people retain the support they need, or is it down to the individual, many of whom are actually very vulnerable people who need help and support?
Prime Minister!
What the government is doing is delivering a system that does give support to vulnerable people, that encourages people to get into the workplace, because we know that work is the best route out of poverty. But if the right honourable gentleman believes that universal credit needed some change, then why, when we made changes like ensuring that we reduced the waiting days for payment, that we brought in a housing benefit overlap to help people, why was it that Labour voted against those changes?
Mr. Speaker, it's Labour that's been speaking up for the poorest in this country. It's Labour that's been challenging this government. It's Labour that wants a decency within our society that this government is incapable of delivering.
Mr. Spencer, I always thought you were a good-natured, laid-back farmer. You seem to be a very overexcitable denizen of the House today. Calm yourself, man. Jeremy Corbyn.
Speaker, the mental health charity Mind says there's a real possibility, and I quote, that many people with mental health problems could see their benefits stopped entirely. It is outrageous that vulnerable people risk losing out because of these botched changes. The government's Brexit negotiations are an abject failure. I can see that by the sullen faces behind her. And that's not just the ERG group, it's the whole lot of them. But everywhere you look, Mr. Speaker, this government is failing. 1 million families using food banks, 1 million workers on 0 hours contracts, 4 million children in poverty, wages lower today than 10 years ago. And on top of that, there's the flawed and failing universal credit. Disabled people risk losing their homes and vital support. Children forced to use food banks. And the Prime Minister wants to put 2 million more people onto this. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is not challenging the burning injustices in our society. She's pouring petrol on the crisis. When will she stop inflicting misery on the people of this country?
Minister!
The right honourable gentleman talks about challenging the burning injustices. Challenging the burning injustices. That's about setting up the racial disparity audit, which says what do public services do and how do people from different communities in our country, are they treated by our public services. It means saying that nobody in this country should be stopped and searched on our streets because of the colour of their skin. That was me as Home Secretary, never the Labour Party. What we're doing is seeing 3.3 million more people in jobs as a result of our balanced approach to the economy. And what have we seen from Labour over the past few days? Iranian state TV broadcasting no confidence votes against Labour members of Parliament. Police investigating anonymous and threatening letters about the deselection of Labour MPs sent to Labour offices. And most shamefully of all, the Honourable Member for Streatham saying that the Labour Party is now an institutionally racist party. That's what he's done to Labour. Just think what he'd do to this country.